Decisive days in Munich and another farce from Putin at the negotiations. This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, and today with us is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channels Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News, and author of Substack, Yuri Rashkin. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Russia plans to send at least 15 negotiators to Geneva, pro-Kremlin media reports. In addition to Medinsky, the Russian delegation in Geneva will include Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin. He is known for supporting the Kremlin's hard line on Ukraine. In his statements, the official has repeatedly promoted Moscow's position about new territorial realities in Ukraine. It seems that Putin is once again beating on proven representatives at the negotiation line. After all, during the 2025 Istanbul talks, Galuzin, together with Medinsky, headed the Russian delegation. In addition, the talks will not take place in the United States, as previously announced. So, how do you think, Yuri, should we expect any changes after the next round of negotiations, considering that Putin sends 15 storytellers who will begin to tell the tales of Scheherazade from 1001 Nights?
I think that the challenge is that there are a lot of people who, for very good, desperate reasons, are hoping that this peace process will lead to peace. And I think it's important to understand that negotiations, that peace process that involves Putin and Trump is not about peace as I think Ukrainians understand it, or as most of us that are supporting Ukraine understand it either. Because there's a different definition of peace according to Putin, according to Ukraine, and according to Trump. And from the Ukrainians' point of view, I think that there's some people that are hopeful that somehow peace will arrive. And I think that there's some English speakers that are hoping that peace will arrive because peace is needed. But it requires paying attention. Because if we pay attention, we notice a strange thing. Not much is happening. There could be statements, but we see basically the same thing, which is Ukraine agreeing to everything except capitulation and trying to shift the pressure onto somebody else, as in showing that Ukraine is compliant with peace process. And we see Trump, who continuously gives Putin more and more time, and now is giving him until summer, I think. And then we have Russia that is continuously just trying to get more time to do what it's trying to do, which is to capture all of Ukraine. And I think that once we understand that dynamic and we understand that nothing's been happening there for a while, we understand that there's maybe this serves some other purpose. And is there a benefit to Ukraine even staying in this peace process where Ukraine keeps offering more and more, and Russia keeps saying, no, we don't want anything because we want the whole thing. And Trump is saying, why can't you make peace? So this dynamic is not changing. And if it's not changing, then we're going to have 15 negotiators or 1,500 negotiators or 15,000. And we can have different leaders of Ukraine, but we're not going to have a different outcome. All of that is part of the big show, which is exactly what President Trump likes. So as long as Donald Trump can create a show where he is the star, and we see that President Zelensky over and over reminds Donald Trump how important he is to Ukraine winning and to peace process, and that's part of the show that Donald Trump demands. It's remarkable that we can have somebody who's to that extent interested in like going to sleep and waking up with the TV in the background talking about him. It's an interesting approach. On the other hand, if we think that Putin and Trump are playing by the same rules, then what does that say about Putin? But I think that peace process is a distraction. We need to remember that this is also trying to distract us from not helping Ukraine militarily by saying, well, peace could break out any minute. maybe this negotiation. But we have to remember that Soviet Union has negotiated for years. They like this kind of stuff. What's more, they like Geneva. The Geneva negotiations, this is like a classic of Soviet propaganda where I grew up, you remember these kind of news chronicles of men in gray suit jackets, coats, whatever, walking into negotiations in Geneva. And that was 1980s. And so now we're back into that setting. It doesn't fill the world with trust that everything's going to work out, but it puts us in a familiar setting. And I think the only trouble is that we have a real war happening. This is not just Cold War, but we have a real hot war in Ukraine. And it's important to understand that Russia is going to use all the tools at its disposal. It's going to use hybrid war as much as negotiations, as much as anything else to try to gain its ends. It's to use any means necessary, because there's no ethics or morals, to use any means necessary to accomplish its goals. Again, similarly to what we're dealing with our own president here in the United States.
Zelensky really mentioned about Trump again, according to his interview for the Atlantic media. Zelensky told that Trump expects the war in Ukraine to end quickly before his November congressional elections. If U.S. President Donald Trump wants to strengthen his position and boost the Republican Party's chances in the midterm U.S. congressional elections, he must seize the moment and stop the war in Ukraine, told Zelensky, who expressed his views in an interview with The Atlantic. Zelensky believes there is no greater victory for Trump than stopping the war between Ukraine and the aggressor state Russia, and that for his legacy as a peacemaker, this would be victory number one. But we understand, Yuri, that to achieve this, pressure must be put on Putin. Our diplomat and former Ukrainian ambassador to the US during Trump's first term, Valery Charlie, told that Trump sometimes shows this pressure on Putin. For example, sanctions against oil. And how do you assess the U.S. decision to ban countries that buy Venezuelan oil from cooperating with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba? Is this really putting pressure on Russia?
Look, there's a couple of things here. First of all, it's remarkable that while we see and discuss the lack of military aid and the really terrible position that Ukraine's been put in through the partially positioning of American government, this administration, there is a bipartisan agreement in the United States that Putin is bad. And that is very, very important, because we have like one person, maybe a handful of people, but unfortunately that one person happens to be president of the United States, who's a big fan of Putin. And so we have this propaganda echo chamber for Trump supporters, where they at the same time can square away that you have Putin, who is bad, and Trump, who, whatever Trump does, is going to show Putin that Trump is the boss and that Trump is in charge and United States, rocks this world. It's really strange and weird, because we see that Trump is really bending backwards over for Putin, even with the example of that 7-day moratorium of not striking civilians in Ukraine during really cold days just a few days ago. And that moratorium was supposed to have been a week, and it was maybe 4 days, and Trump still said that Putin kept his promise. So this is just bending over backwards to try to justify why Putin is actually not as bad as we all think he is, based on some weird logic. And so that brings us to, can this help Trump and Republicans in elections? That's where Zelensky, I'm afraid, needs to get stand in a long line of people who wish that Donald Trump would stop mucking things up. Because he is doing things that he could improve tremendously to his own benefit, that he would be glorified, amazing forever and ever, if he would stop screwing things up. And we see this all over. Ukraine is just the latest example, because it's just another example of bad management of a situation that could really unfold favorably for this president if he just played his cards right right. But we know that playing his cards right is not what he's good at or what he usually does. And so this is just a typical problem where Zelensky is trying to explain, fine, you want profit, you want to be the good guy, here's a scenario, all right there. And of course, Trump will not choose this because, well, you see, to Trump, he is worshiping strength. And in a strength equation, Russia is ultimately stronger than Ukraine. So Ukraine is the one that needs to bend over for Russia, and Trump and Putin are going to be ruling the world like the big boys in the playground that they think they are. And in addition to this, there's going to be $12 trillion of money that will be divided between Trump and Putin, and it's going to be so much money. And this is a number that came out of Zelensky, and I'm not sure the exact amount, and nobody can be sure, because these numbers are made up. And I'm not sure if you sold Russia entirely or in pieces, you would get $12 trillion. Because, I mean, not too long ago, Dmitriev was talking about rescuing Russian economy of $3 trillion. But now this deal is like, 12 trillion. Is this going to help Trump stay engaged? Yes. Is it going to help him with elections? Not with Democrats because they see and they don't like, and not with independents who are seeing more and more and they don't like. In fact, according to the latest numbers, Trump is now losing support of low information voters. That's really important because he won those people who don't watch this show, people who don't stay tuned in, people who don't pay attention. They overwhelmingly prefer Trump in 2024 in the United States. But now they're starting to catch on. So maybe there's a problem there because maybe they live in the reality, even if our president refuses to and tells them not to pay attention to what their eyes are telling them. And of course, the question is about the Republicans. Are they paying attention? Are they noticing what's happening? And we're starting to see that there is a big problem with Republicans, not because Republicans are losing faith as a group, because when you have a cult and you have followers, that's not what happens. But what we do see happen is the Trump coalition is cracking up. And this is where low information voters are turning away from Trump. People with less than college education who supposedly, the less you know, again, the less you know, the more you're likely to be a Trump supporter, unless you're a Russian speaker. Then you're a Trump supporter no matter what and what. Through and through, I feel like at the end when the Trump's base is going to decrease to its smallest, most hardened base, that's going to be Russian speakers in America. I don't know how that works. I mean, I know how that works, but it's a different conversation. So the Trump's coalition is cracking, and part of it, huge part of the crack, is Latino men, because Latino men have looked at Trump as a macho, and they thought, you know what, like all that kind of a dynamic, they saw that in Latin American dictators, and similarly to Russian immigrants who saw a familiar dictator and went straight for him, like from an abused relationship, you go to not what's good for you, but what you know. The Latinos are now turning away from Trump because they realize that the worst thing you can be right now, the most dangerous thing you can be in the United States right now is Latino, Hispanic, because those are the people that feel at most uncertain. Most have to worry about carrying their documentation with them. It's a very precarious situation. How do you think this is reflecting in the Latino and Hispanic community? Not well. And so losing that support, that again, things were going so well for Trump. He could have just not done that extreme immigration enforcement, which was really a bad idea. And he would have had those Latinos and probably would have grown more because they don't care about supporting all that liberal woke stuff. They want, they like macho. They just want, be able to work and make money. And what else is there? Raise their families, the religion. It's all could have been really good Trump mix. But Trump had to go with Stephen Miller's idea and about active immigration enforcement. And now his coalition is collapsing. We see election results in Dallas that's supposed to be total Republican base falling apart because of Latinos. How does this connect to Ukraine? Well, because the less Trump you have, the more help for Ukraine you have. So we saw that last year, aid to Ukraine plunged by 99%, which is slightly better than I expected. But I think that Ukraine needs to see what's happening in the United States, needs to understand that this president is losing strength, losing popularity, becoming more aggressive, more dangerous. It's a spiral that he's going into, which is causing him to lose more support and on and on and on. And understand that Trump is not the future. Europe is really a hugely much more important ally right now than the United States, in spite of all the weapons that we have. And I think it's just really important to understand that Europe right now is much more important, better, productive ally to Ukraine. And I think they both just need to, hug each other and understand that they're in this together. You are in this together. I am in the United States. We have our own problems to deal with. But I think that that is the direction that the things need to go, because Trump is not going to cause, even if there was peace, let's say peace broke out and this was paused, like Zelensky is asking, nothing until midterm elections. Do you think it's going to help Trump with his base? They're going to say, okay, Trump was great, and now what? We didn't care about Ukraine before. We don't care about. This is a deal between Trump and Putin. This is really nothing about the elections, because Democrats are not going to forgive and are not going to say like, oh, Trump, amazing. They're going to say, look, you're trying to set up a pause. You're trying to set up Ukraine to fail. You don't care about Ukraine. You don't care about democracy. We don't care about you. And independents are not going to switch because of Ukraine. And Republicans, again, Latino men, different problems. And you see, so this is just not going to be anything that's really going to score points for Trump. It's not going to bring Latino men back. It's not going to bring low information voters who didn't care about news to begin with back. And it's not going to bring people who are uneducated back because they didn't care. So I think this is just a kind of a strange myth that is not where Trump's pressure points are. Pressure points are Kremlin, money, wallet, Putin.
Yes, agree. About European unity and unity of our allies, mentioned the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte at a ministerial meeting in Brussels ahead of the Munich Security Conference. Rutte also said that Russia is weak on the battlefield. Russia wants us to perceive it as a mighty bear, but you could say it's advancing in Ukraine at the speed of a garden snail. So let's not fall for Russian propaganda. The Russian armed forces advance and commented about situation on the front. Rutte declared that Russia's shocking losses. We see everybody. And Rutte also believes that Europe has begun to take more active responsibility for its own defense. We've seen a clear convergence of views and unity. Europe is truly becoming stronger and taking on a great responsibility for leadership within NATO. Does Trump really not see Putin's weakness in such way? And the United States of America, is it still part of a united NATO or no?
I think Mr. Rutte has a very difficult job of sitting on a lot of chairs while being such a skinny guy. It's really, but he is trying. And he has to switch chairs fast, and he has to go from we need United States to Russia is weak to it's a membership situation. And I do lean towards the point of view of people who feel like he is doing his job. His job is to, keep members together, keep the organization strong and prosperous, not get members to leave. He doesn't want to be, Secretary General of NATO, under whom United States left NATO. That wouldn't be a good thing to be on his resume, in his opinion at the moment. Now, down the road, it could be like a point of pride, because it could be like the beginning of the new future where we understood that the United States under Trump is no friend of democracy. But there's also a bigger concern that if Russia is no friend, if United States is no friend of democracy, does it mean that we become friend of Russia? And considering that our president hung portrait of himself and Putin from Anchorage, just to remind everyone the spirit of Anchorage, what maybe that's all about. I think that Mr. Rutte is is trying to balance a lot of, dishes, hats, chairs, all at the same time. At the same moment, I have to acknowledge that in the age of Trump, press releases and statements and pronouncements gain on a special kind of a different value because they are flashier and less meaningful. They have to be, rhetoric has to be more, it has to be stronger to get noticed. You have to use big, the image, the big emotions and weakness of Russia. It's great. I'd like to think about weak Russia. I think that's a wonderful, warm thought kind of a thing. But if he was going to be more restrained, but restrained is not, I think, what sells now. So that's kind of the interesting moment to me is that Rutte is both not, he's very in a very difficult situation, precarious situation, and yet he has to speak in a very forceful way, whatever it is that he's saying. Well, I mean, NATO is a military alliance for, crying out loud. So how they also, their Secretary General, he shouldn't be, coming out with roses and flowers. He should be saying strong things. But it's all in matter of perspective because yes, Russia is weak and yes, Europe needs United States. But if and Ukraine would have liked to have more support. But if reality is what it is, then what happens? Then it turns out that these pronouncements are really not useful or helpful because Russia is weak, and yet Russia is continuing to engage in an insane, barbaric war with its neighbor for 14 years now, and it is weak. And yes, Europe needs United States because United States has all that military that is so amazingly powerful that, of course, Europe would like to have it and really needs it. But if it wasn't available, would it surrender? I think it would try to figure out what it's doing right now. It's looking for other ways because it sees that the United States has become an unreliable partner. So that's where those kinds of pronouncements about how things supposedly are, they're kind of like a majority consensus opinion, but that's not certainly 100% because when we are faced with reality, then we have to make serious choices. And that's where we see even Donald Trump back away from Greenland when he sees that he's going to get resistance, not because Greenland can defend itself against the United States, but because markets are going to collapse, because the allies are going to walk away. And that's where people go, oh, I guess I'm not as crazy as you thought, and pull back.
Vladislav Graskevich is again on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and so on. Ukrainian skeletonist Vladislav Graskevich won far more, we think, than medals. He defended the honor and dignity of Ukraine and the memory of all those athletes who will never be able to compete in the Olympic Games because Putin killed them. How did the International Olympic Committee sink so low, so far below Putin's level even, and how truly this feat also brought Ukraine back onto the agenda?
I will say this is an issue where I feel like my position is not necessarily 100% aligned with Ukrainians, in a sense that, or maybe it's 110% aligned with Ukrainians. You decide, because when I think about what this amazing person did, and the Geraskevich, and he put pictures of people on his helmet as a reminder of support for him, and this has to do, of course, with war in Ukraine. And what's wrong with that? I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and damned be everyone who stood in his way, starting with Putin. And then I think about, okay, so if everybody's allowed to do this, is this, I guess I'm using Kant's approach of the imperative, that we are looking at something that if it is allowed for everyone, will this be a good thing? Do we want people supporting every political cause? Yes, war and politics are supposed to be out of Olympics, but if we bring them in for one, should we bring them in for everyone? And that's where I wonder, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we should introduce those ideas and not hide from real world behind this, oh, we're sports, we're Olympics, we shouldn't talk about anything that's important to these athletes, the lives that they live, the world that they come from, the world that we all live in. And that's where I wonder that's when I wonder if maybe we need to allow athletes to express themselves, and we need to get rid of this kind of a very hypocritical pretense that sport is separate. When we look at how Russia engages in international events in a very imperial, predatorial way, where they try to bend any rule they can possibly bend, and then including corrupting the Olympic movement in order to get themselves back and then to participate, then it feels like the war is already inside the Olympics. The war is already in, politics is already there. And maybe this is just an attempt to kind of cover up what is coming to the surface, which is reality. And I think that this is a big decision for each person individually, because there are greater things in life than Olympic medals. And it starts with having trust in yourself and trust that you can that you will do the right thing, and then people can trust you. And so I think that Geraskevich did an amazing, powerful thing, and he also, like an adult, is dealing with consequences, which is he knew the rules, I presume, and he did what he did anyway, and he paying the consequences. And I think it's a very powerful statement in that way as well. This is what happens. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do the right thing. We should just be prepared to face the consequences and be okay with the consequences, because we're adults. Or if not, then we can do it differently. But I think that this is a very important moment, and I feel like there's a lot to think about here. And if I had my hat, I would take it off before this man who did such a strong gesture and is dealing with the fallout of his decision.
Yuri, thank you very much. Thank you very much for such conversation, for your clever thoughts as usual. See you next week. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channels Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News, and author of Substack. Yuri Rashkin, please subscribe to our sources and to YouTube channel War and Politics 24. Leave your comments, please. Take care.